In this video, we're going to be covering the basics of the SplineWarp node and its interface. So I'm going to drop down a SplineWarp. I'll hit Tab and start typing Spline. There we go, SplineWarp. The SplineWarp, as its name implies, can warp images, but unlike the grid warp, it uses splines like rotoshapes to control the regions of the image to distort. Now you'll notice that the interface is quite different, but also similar. It's got the basic controls that are common to the roto node up here along the top, and then it's got these buttons that are similar but not identical to the buttons in the grid warp node. The SplineWarp node has had quite a lot of work done on it in recent versions, and they've changed the paradigm in the last couple of versions, so it's a little different if you've used it before. If you've never used it before, everything's going to seem new to you, so it won't really matter. So let's get into it, and we'll just start with the basics here. Obviously, you have to draw splines just as you would in the roto node, so let's start drawing some splines here. I'm going to create a basic shape around this kitten's eye, and then I'll hit enter to close the shape. There we go. Now, the thing that makes the SplineWarp a little different from the grid warp is that right out of the box in this newer version, nothing will happen if you simply draw a spline. It has no destination spline partner to tell Nuke to warp to. So in order to create your initial A spline or starting spline and B spline, you need to either draw the spline, or a simple way to do it is to draw your A spline, and then to create the corresponding B spline, right click on it and then select duplicate and join. And that will create the corresponding spline that goes with it. They're right on top of each other now, so you can't tell which is A and which is B, but you can see in the properties bin here that these ghosted out and italicized column here will tell you which other spline it's paired with. So if you want to keep things a little bit more tidy right off the bat, you can start organizing these splines by creating another group and putting them in the, you can also rename them. So Bezier 1 was our source, and in a simple case like this, this will work. And Bezier 2 is our destination. So let's start editing our destination spline. You can see Nuke has immediately started warping it, much as it would have in the SplineWarp. These dotted yellow lines between the source and the destination are the correspondence points, and you'll notice that in this particular case they're connected from point to point on the splines, but they don't have to be. It's possible to create these manually, and we'll do that in the next example. Let's do the other way of creating splines. So I'm still in A, the source distorted. Let's go back to the undistorted image so that we can accurately draw. And I'm going to create a new shape. I'm hitting enter to close the shape, so now this eye has its shape. And rather than duplicating and connecting the shapes immediately, I'm going to draw a second shape. So we'll make this one smaller. So to join these two shapes together, because you'll see right now they're just two shapes, basic shapes, I'll use the Join Shapes tool. So I'll select my A, and then I'll select my B, or my out, and you'll see they are now paired with each other. Let's check the correspondence between. Actually, let's look at them warped. See, we're looking at them warped in the source warped, and it's getting all twisty and messed up. That's probably because the correspondence between them isn't as tidy as it was in our other setup here. And now that I've selected the edit tool, you can see right there the correspondence is all twisted. So this part of this spline doesn't know that it goes with this part of this spline. So let's edit that. You can use the edit correspondence points here. And now I can slide these correspondence points around using this node, this mode, so that there's less tension in them. They are actually going from one to the other. Now, obviously this is a little bit more tedious than the previous method, but depending on the context, sometimes it's a little more difficult to duplicate the shape for the source and destination, and drawing the shapes separately is more appropriate. Okay, that's one messed up looking cat, but let's toggle this on and off. I'm just basically A-Bing between the original image and the warp. Let me turn off the overlays. And you can see that the whole cat's head and body is deforming, even though all we were really editing is the eyes. So let's explore another feature that's useful to know about. We'll draw another shape here, and I'm going to look at the unwarped version. Start creating another shape just around the cat's head. And rather than linking this shape to anything, I'm going to make this into a hard boundary, which will basically constrain everything within it so that it does not warp anything outside. So this will become sort of like a bounding shape that that stops the warping from moving past it. So to do that, you turn it on here. This is how you enable a hard boundary with this button here. So now that becomes a hard boundary, and it changes color. And let's view this warped, and you'll see now only the cat's head is warping. It's also possible to create a pin, which is a single point instead of a curve, and it has a source and destination, and you can use that for pinning stuff down as well, sort of like the hard boundary. So I'm going to go back to A, and we'll select the pin here. I'm going to pin down because the cat's nose was moving too much for my taste, let's say. I'm going to stick a few pins on the cat's nose here. And then we'll toggle back on distortion, and you'll see now right around the cat's nose, it's not distorting as much. These pins do have an A and a B position, so if you wanted to edit them to use them as a morphing or warping tool, you can do that. So right now we are editing the destination for this one, and you can see it will actually warp the nose a little, so just around this little force field around the pin. So pins can be handy for little spot fixes or tweaks. Sometimes they can also be difficult to manage, so take them, use them with caution. So that's the basics of the SplineWarp node. There's obviously a lot more to it. It can be used for morphs as well as simple warps like this. And in the next example, we'll look at morphing using the SplineWarp.